So it was pointed out to me in a few conversations recently that my articles and videos have predominantly been negative over the past couple of weeks, as I've looked at aspects of the game that I don't think have been well handled, from citadels through supercapitals to the NPE. Whilst I remain firm in my belief that it's worth criticising CCP when they either fail to address or address poorly the problems in the game, there's definitely a need to balance it out with a reminder of some of the things in which CCP has succeeded. Often it can be easy to forget the problems that have been addressed and only focus on the ones that are affecting you right now. And that's not being ungrateful, that's just how people work. You don't notice the absence of a problem nearly as much as the presence of one, especially once the community's general conversation has moved on. What I hope that this will do is show that I'm not someone who only sees the worst in CCP, and highlight why I think some of these changes were both necessary and how they positively impacted EVE Online. I can say with near certainty that there are going to be some good changes that we're missing from this, as talented quote-unquote little things devs like Karka could probably fill up a few thousand words on their own, but I tried to focus on larger ecosystem level changes to stop this piece from being a horrendous length. Still, if you think I've missed something that's important to you, feel free to bring them up in the comments below. The first major way in which I think CCP has improved the game is through technical improvements. And EVE was really starting to show its age in 2018, being limited to a 32-bit client, and with pretty much every major battle across that year running into crippling server stability issues that helped change the course of those fights. As the year wore on and this became more and more understood, people began to change the way that they even fought fights to work around this. It's a long-standing maxim within EVE Online development that players will expand to fill the lag, but as you can see from this post, it had become an issue that a wide section of the player base felt was making the game less fun to play. And CCP listened to this, through a mix of mechanical changes like the removal of Titan explosions, the introduction of a 64-bit client, and closer work with the player base when it came to placing systems on reinforced nodes. A lot of the problems raised were weeded out. Whilst we won't know how effective these changes will be at this kind of scale that the war in 2018 brought, it has at the very least made playing in smaller, around 1,000 member fights a much more pleasant and responsive experience by allowing EVE to take advantage of the raw power of modern hardware. In addition, DirectX 12 integration will likely open up some cool graphical options in the future. These technical improvements haven't even been strictly limited to inside the game, with the relaunched EVE Portal app being more powerful than any previous attempt to create a companion app, with trust protocols which allow for skill queue updates. With time, we might even see more features added, and I greatly look forward to the day where I can update my buy and sell orders whilst on the toilet. Another of CCP's successes in 2019, at least by my reckoning, was the Spring Balance Pass. And this showed that the technical team wasn't the only arm of CCP that learnt from the wars of 2018, as game design was able to, in conjunction with the CSM and player feedback, learn a great deal about how the supercapital versus supercapital metagame had evolved with 4 years of post-BTAC R5 development, and took steps to mitigate the facts-based stalemates that these fights often turned into. The introduction of diminishing returns to remote repairs in the Spring Balance Pass was CCP's answer, and judging by what I expect to be the largest super fight of the year in 01Y, it seems to have been a success. Even in a situation where neither side could use DD volleys to kill the other, Titans from both involved parties still ended up dying, as we no longer had the one-to-one parity in importance between incoming reps and incoming DPS. Whilst that change was undeniably the crux of the pass, it also contained an array of other things: raw core nerfs, an insurance nerf, the NSA mini-siege change, and a wide array of buffs to underperforming subcapitals. As you can see from the thread at the time, it was met with overwhelming positivity by the player base, especially given the promises of future passes like it in the months to come, and the announced continuation of Tierside, although those sadly ended up not happening. All of it helped to shake up the metagame, make new ships more viable, and overall just encourage people to want to try and undock in new weird things and get blown up trying to make them work. Of all the parts of this article, this was easily the one that impacted my gameplay the most, and by God, it was reinvigorating. It felt like being handed a new set of toys to go and slam into other people's sandcastles, and even though the reality was that not a great deal had changed. Plus, of course, who could forget their mock-up of CCP Falcon as Aura. Another area in which CCP made strides towards improving was their ability to combat botting. And botting has been a constant topic of discussion within the player base for a long time, but frustrations with it really bubbled over in 2018 and 2019, with it even being something I wrote about. Typing bot into the search bar of REVE will show you just how much vitriol has frothed up around it, leading to it being noted by Steve Mesner of PC Gamer in his own piece. But the general consensus was that CCP just wasn't really willing to do anything serious to combat the issue, under the cynical assumption that it made them more money to just ignore it. And 2019, in my opinion, showed just how serious team security could get on bots, and that they were willing to work with game design and other parts of CCP to reach their goals of a bot-free EVE. There were a few hiccups, such as the release of a chart showing where people had been banned, which was used to justify a lot of pretty disgusting racism against the Chinese community, but the public executions and later the monthly security report reassured the community that team security was working to deal with the problem, which was one of the biggest things that CCP faced. The V&I rework, and more importantly the changes to what skills alpha clones had available that came later this year, also helped to reduce the replaceability and efficacy of botting characters, as V&Is had previously allowed mass alpha pilots to be trained in preparation for their eventual bans, making it difficult for team security to clamp down on them. It also helped reduce the perception of botting being prevalent, as there was at the end of the day very little difference in play patterns between a botting V&I and a player-run V&I, which led to the general feeling of New Eden being infested with them. We even saw drastic changes to the ways that alphas were able to interact with missions in order to lock them out of being abused to run distribution missions, as was discovered by EVE's very own true crime reporter in Noisy Gamer. Now, I'm sure that there are still bots out there making ISK. After all, it's deeply connected with the RMT market and therefore probably someone's literal job, but their job has been made decisively harder in 2019, and I'd like to think that we can all agree that that's a good thing. Perhaps unsurprisingly, another area in which CCP has excelled is in the delivery of their PvE content that's tied into this current expansion, Invasion. Now, for those of you who dwell exclusively in nullsec or wormholes, the invasion either had no impact on you or had the quote-unquote excitement of dealing with drifters for a fortnight. Highsec, on the other hand, was delivered the full invasion mechanic, which is similar to how incursions function. An area is given unique effects and unique sites to complete, and requires players to work together in order to beat the sites. This, on its own, would probably be great, as social PvE is one of the best ways to make PvE in EVE not become the same monotonous AFK fare that it often becomes without the requirement to work with other people, and encouraging players in Highsec to potentially meet up and join other people and eventually corporations is likely to increase their chances of sticking with the community and the game. But what I really wanted to focus on here is, rather than kicking the feature out and then moving on to something else, as has been a bad habit of CCP, it seems real focus and care has been put onto iterating the invasion content over time, as well as expanding it. New sites like the emerging conduits have been added, and the practice of farming Triglavian ships on gates has been responded to and integrated into the invasion model, rather than taking away, showing that CCP is willing to positively react to the emergent gameplay that players are creating, whilst bugs and desync issues that plagued earlier versions of the site have been polished, although some do remain. Now, I haven't had the chance to take part in this personally, but I have casually watched a few of Ashtarothi's streams as he gets involved in taking on the spooky Triangle Men, and he and his fleetmates seem to just have a ton of fun dealing with the challenges thrown at them. I hope this experiment proves to be a success by whatever metric CCP is using, as a more reactive and dynamic PvE development process would have a lot of benefits if expanded to the rest of the game, from helping make bodders suffer to increasing the diversity of ships that can be used to make ISK. CCP's recent focus on quote-unquote stopping the bleeding has also paid dividends, and that particular phrase comes from the keynote presentation in EVE Berlin, when recapping some of the changes made during 2019 that aimed to fix a wide range of systemic issues that hurt EVE Online's retention rate with new players, and covered a wide range of little things that certainly don't feel little to those with minimal knowledge of the game. Whilst I addressed a wide range of other gushing chest wounds on that front in my video Stop Reworking the NPE, I can't deny that CCP has identified some key areas of their own and rushed to address them. The war deck changes are undeniably the first among them. Whilst there were problems with the initial rollout and mechanics, the stats that CCP released showed just what an impact it had on people being willing to join corporations and get involved in the social side of EVE. Although without any labels to the axes, it is kind of hard to tell exactly how big of a jump we saw. The introduction of the Skills on Demand system also made acquiring new skill books a much easier process that didn't break up the flow of the game, and the proposed changes to the fitting window should allow newer players a better idea of what a good fit looks like, and will hopefully make them less reliant on other players or out-of-game guides. Whilst none of this will impact veterans directly, keeping more fresh blood in the game is a critical part of ensuring the community stays healthy, as older players inevitably drift away from the game. The fresh-faced recruits of 2019 will be the mainline pilots of 2020, and hopefully the leaders of 2025, so making sure the widest possible population sticks with the game up until that point is key, and it is great to see CCP working to drive real change in that direction. Now that does mark the end of what I consider to be the positive mechanical changes that have been made to EVE Online, but it doesn't make it the end of this list, as I also want to talk about the new face of EVE Online, Hilmar. The loss of CCP Seagull in 2018 was a blow to the wider community, not just due to the role she filled or any specific development effort that she spearheaded as executive producer, but because she was widely perceived to be the face of EVE Online's development team. She stood up at every fanfest and presented a roadmap to the audience, which presented a vision for where the game was going, talked openly and honestly in a myriad of interviews when frustration bubbled up in the community, and her video addresses from everything to updates to the introduction of free-to-play were widely circulated and gave both a personal face and a personal connection to the player base, and also the sense that CCP was listening to the wider community. Her replacement, CCP Manbjorn, seemed completely uninterested in filling this role, lacking a Twitter or any form of direct contact with the community. CCP Berger, for his part, tried his best to take on the responsibility of being the face of EVE Online's direction, as can be seen in the earlier EVE Pulse videos. However, this too fell by the wayside, and CCP as a whole morphed back into a company where only the individual developers were points of contact for the community, which in my opinion contributed to the feeling that CCP was decidedly rudderless as an organisation. Something that only helped deepen the community's mistrust and left everyone wondering just what the plan was and where EVE was headed, or if there even was a plan. In the last few months, a new, or perhaps I should say returning, face came to the front in order to present a lifeline of connection between the player base and CCP, identifying problems and discussing them openly and frankly. CCP Helmar, also known as Hilmar. Whilst he has yet to lay out a roadmap or a vision of what he, and by extension CCP, wants EVE to be in the future, he has reached out on both Twitter and through podcasts and interviews with various outlets in order to talk about those problems, and coined the term Chaos Era to describe and explain CCP's general efforts to shake things up. All in all, whilst you might not agree with the particular changes that it seems Hilmar has driven, having someone clearly and publicly at the helm of EVE's development has done a great deal to restore confidence that CCP is at least working towards something, and my hope is that either in Vegas or FanFest 2020, we get a glimpse of exactly what that something is. And the final thing that I wanted to highlight is obviously going to be a little controversial, and that's that CCP does seem to be willing to challenge the fundamental systems that underpin the game. Putting aside arguments as to whether or not the blackout or Sino changes are or going to or have had positive impacts on the game, something I noted at the time of the initial announcement of the blackout was my relief that CCP had quote-unquote rediscovered their testicular fortitude. Changing local was, despite something that had been talked about for over a decade, a seeming impossibility due to how little CCP wanted to iterate on the core features of EVE Online. Their communication could have been better, as could have been their follow-up, but the fact that most people spun out elaborate fantasies about observatories being introduced, or that we'd soon be taking the fight to the drifters to get their local back, showed to me the sheer amount of interest and excitement that changing something so fundamental can bring. Shaking up the snow globe is great, and people want it to happen. CCP just needs to be careful that they don't accidentally throw the snow globe at a wall in the process. Some of the fundamental systems that EVE is based upon probably do feed into the general feeling of stagnation, and while straight up removing things is both unpopular with those affected and a lazy approach to development, identifying these systems and iterating on or reworking them is a promising route for CCP to be heading down. I hope that this isn't something CCP shies away from, but instead identifies the problem in their current approach and works to move away from a chaos era to a butterfly era, because, as we all know, small changes can cause just as many waves as huge ones. Alright, that marks the end of the video, so thank you for watching, and feel free to join in the discussion below, and point out some of the things that you think I might have missed, or some things that you disagree with. A special thanks as always goes out to our Crassus, Pinche Infidel from Old School, as well as to our other $5 patrons in Dustin Prater, Meeks, Czar, Olav Aldent, Kem, Raphael, and Big Bada Boom. I have to say that I did not expect so many people to think this content was worth their hard-earned greenbacks, and it means a great deal to me. I hope I can keep you all entertained for many months to come. Until next time, fly smart and take care.